Hey guys, hey. Hey guys, hey, this is Anne Marie. And we're going to do a little makeup chronicle because I have to multitask today. I have to shoot some content for my travel channel. I have to shoot some content for this channel. And I'm trying to get some makeup on my face really quickly before I get to go shoot the content for my travel channel. And I have been thinking a lot. I have a lot of things on my mind. I've been home for a couple of weeks now from my trip. I was traveling for about 5 weeks in Europe, and I am now back in Mexico, and I'll be honest, I've been kind of sad. I've been a little depressed by everything that I see in Western media, the things that are happening in the United States, and I haven't really felt like doing content, but I actually feel like I need to say some of these things out loud, but I'm trying to be very thoughtful about how I say them. And I also am aware of a lot of things that have happened in the interim since my last video. The Essence Festival happened, and I'm gonna do a separate video about my thoughts about some of the commentary around that and my wider thoughts on the whole diaspora war issue and things like that. That'll be in a separate video that will be coming very soon. But in this video, I wanted to respond to something because I've got a couple comments, and I know that people mean well, but I'm going to mention this and I'm going to try to put it in a larger context if I can. So I've got a couple comments. Some of you may be aware, on July 4, which is a day that certain sectors of the American population celebrate independence from the British government all those years ago, that there was a protest that took place in Mexico City, Mexico. And you all know I live in Mexico. I do not live in Mexico City, where they're saying a couple hundred, and I'll double check to see what the actual number was. And if I find it before I post this video, I'll put it on the screen. But they're saying a couple hundred people were protesting gentrification in Mexico City. I've had a couple people come into my comments to ask me if I'm safe and say they hope I'm okay. And I know that people mean well, but I think those kinds of comments expose the lack of awareness that Americans have about the precarious situation they are in their own country, and the lack of awareness that Americans have about other countries, including Mexico, who's right to the south of you, right? Canada being to the north. I've been very aware of these conversations because I talk to people who aren't American. I don't limit my interactions in Mexico to just Americans, and a lot of Americans that live in Mexico live in a bubble. I feel in a way I live in sort of a bubble, just not as big of a bubble as other Americans do, because I live in a place in Mexico that has a very large American immigrant population. It's a soft landing, which is why I picked it. It's an easy place to come and settle and get acclimated. But it also kind of allows you to, if you choose, live here. There are people who have lived here for years and years. There are people who have lived here since the 70s and 80s, right? Because there are people who came here from the military, other places. So there are a lot of Americans, there are a lot of white, not a lot, but there are white Americans here. They're not the majority. It's a majority Mexican town, otherwise I wouldn't have moved here. But there are a lot of Americans that live here, and white Americans, and they bring their white American BS with them. So I don't have a lot of interaction with the white American population in the town where I live. And that's very intentional on my part, because I didn't leave the US to come and deal with their BS. And wherever they go, there they are, and they bring their BS with them. But I want to be very clear. There was no riot in Mexico City. There were a couple hundred people who were protesting gentrification, right? And as a person who moved from Washington, D.C., in part due to gentrification, mainly because I didn't want to live in the United States of America anymore, but also because D.C. didn't feel like the place that I had moved to in the 90s. And when I visit there, it doesn't feel like the place that I moved to, and I don't regret leaving, right? My neighborhood that I lived in is majority white now. I'm pretty sure the house that I used to live in, even though I didn't sell it to somebody white, it's very clear that the person who bought it flipped it and sold it to somebody white. And which they have every right to do, was their property. But I digress. But what I'm saying is, gentrification has negative impacts on communities of color no matter where it happens, and it is having a negative impact on communities in Mexico, right? And Mexico City is the capital city of Mexico. How would Americans like it if a group of Chinese people came in because they had the money and bought up all the property in Washington, D.C., and wanted everyone to learn Chinese and to put all the menus in Chinese and to put signage in Chinese? Do you think white Americans would be okay with that? Do you think any Americans would be okay with that? So, and how would you like it if a bunch of people moved there and because of it, landlords, right, decided they would rather rent to those people because those people are willing to pay more in rent because for them it's not expensive because their currency is of a higher value. If the Chinese, whatever their currency is it the yen? I think the Japanese is the Japanese is the yen. I don't know what the Chinese currency is. But, and it's your capital city. Wouldn't you want to protest? Wouldn't you want to raise a little hell? Wouldn't you want your government to do something? So I don't have any argument with Mexican local people for feeling the way that they do. I see what gentrification has done in the place where I live and how it has impacted even my standard of living over time because prices just keep going up, up, up because new Americans are coming here and they don't negotiate because they think $1,000 for rent is cheap. But for a local Mexican person, that's a lot of money. 20,000 pesos, which is about the equivalent of $1,000 a month for rent, is a lot of money for a local person anywhere in Mexico, unless they're upper middle class. And there are upper middle class people in Mexico. They're very wealthy people in Mexico who are landowners, who are real estate owners, who are the landlords, who are driving this problem. But it's also being driven by the people who come in, live in Mexico, and not only are they contributing to the raising of the rents, but they're also bringing their obnoxious gringo behavior. And it's not just white people. I've seen black people engage in some of these problematic behaviors as well, where they have expectations that Mexico should be like America. And I've had to call people out on it. So I understand where some of the resentment comes from. But the reality is that I still feel very welcome here. I don't feel unsafe here. I feel much safer here than I've ever felt in the United States. So for all of you who are worrying about my safety, I say, while I appreciate your concern, I suggest you spend more time worrying about your own safety. Because if you haven't noticed, the United States of America is crumbling. Its democracy is crumbling. It is quickly openly turned into a fascist authoritarian state. So I suggest that you turn your attention to that. But that's not even really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is why so many of you are willing to take at face value the news reports you see or whatever you saw on social media where a couple people broke some windows downtown in Mexico City during the protest. That always happens during protests. There are always people who use it as an opportunity to engage in vandalism or steal shit. We know this in America, do we not? Right? But again, it was a couple hundred people, and of that 100 people, maybe a handful of those people decided to break windows or whatever. But that's what Western media grabbed onto and sent across social media and created this narrative that there was a, quote, riot, unquote, and that people were protesting tourism and that people were protesting American tourism, which is not what people were protesting about. Nobody's saying they don't want tourism. They're saying they want the government to do more to control the number of Americans that move to Mexico. And they have every right to say that, right? And the government is making changes. It is definitely making changes because I will say that it is different to apply for residency than it was even 6 months ago. So they are making changes. It's slow, but they're making changes. But the reality is that there are Americans that come to Mexico on tourist visas, get an Airbnb or get a rental, and work from wherever they are. And a lot of them are doing it in Mexico City, the capital city of Mexico. And they don't even bother to apply for residency. They don't even bother to do it the quote right way, unquote, that they love to talk about when they talk about immigrants in the United States. And these people are not contributing to the economy of Mexico in any way, shape, or form, right? They are not opening businesses or hiring Mexicans. They are making money in Mexico. They don't have to pay taxes on that money because it's not being made in Mexico. And they're not even there legally. And that's not right. And people have a right to be unhappy about that. Now, should people be unhappy about the fact that there are people who are coming and becoming residents like I did? I didn't step foot in Mexico until I had gotten my residency card and I was completely legal because I followed the rules. I wasn't going to come and disrespect the country. But I knew people, Black people, who lived in Mexico for years and never got residency. They lived there. They enjoyed the economy. They built businesses while they were there. Some of them still live there. Some of them have left because they don't need to live there anymore. And I don't think that that's right. And they could never do, immigrants can't do the reverse of that in the United States. Undocumented workers, a lot of them, the majority of them in the United States, are law-abiding people who either came across the border because of issues in their country, most of which are caused by the United States government and its allies, and or came as students, which is a whole other conversation, and then stayed after graduation. There are lots of reasons why people end up. And all of these people pay taxes. All of them pay taxes. They don't get benefit. They're not beneficiaries of taxes. They can't get public assistance. They can't get rental assistance. They can't get all the things that people lie on social media and say that they're getting. They don't get those things. They don't get those things. But they pay taxes that help pay for those things for American citizens. They pick the fruits. They clean the chickens. They clean the shrimp. They do the jobs that now the United States government is saying that Medicaid recipients will have to do. Right? That's what they're saying. I'll be interested in seeing how that works out. But that's what they're saying. If you've ever seen video of migrant workers in those fields picking radishes and strawberries at lightning speed, I want to wait and see Americans do that in large numbers. I'm not saying individual Americans will not be poor enough and may not be coerced and forced into doing it. But are they going to do it at the rate those migrant workers have been doing it? They will not. And instead, what the U.S. government is getting ready to do is put those people in those concentration camps and then farm them out to corporations for free, which is slavery. We're bringing back slavery in the United States of America. And again, in a system where people can just be snatched, it's very unlikely that every single person that ends up in these camps will only be undocumented workers and migrant workers. Always remember that during the Third Reich, people talk about the Holocaust as if Jews are the only ones that died. Black people were put in concentration camps in Germany. Look it up. It's a fact. Or go to the Holocaust Museum. It's all there. Disabled people, gypsies, homosexuals, anybody they decided was undesirable ended up in those camps eventually. Enemies of the state, people who are opponents to the government, members of the opposing party, people who fell out with the head of state. All those people ended up in camps. It wasn't just the Jews. Was a disproportionate number of them the Jews? Yes, because that's who they wanted to target, and that's who they had turned the rest of the population against. So they could talk about them, call them vermin, say that they were poisoning the country. Does any of that sound familiar? But it wasn't just them. In the end, lots of other people ended up there. So for all who think that their birthright citizenship, which could very well go away very soon, who think their birthright citizenship is going to save them, the plantation that their grandparents worked on gives them some special status, you're going to find out that they don't care. And that some of the people they want to get rid of are you. Not people who look like you, but you. Or put you back on the plantation where they believe you belong. So critical thinking is in short supply. Stop and think, why was this story from Mexico City spread across social media in the way that it was? Why? Who benefits from that? The United States government doesn't have an interest in having people retire to other places and take their retirement dollars to those other places. And if they can keep people scared and make them afraid to travel because they're afraid that they won't be able to get back into the country, they're afraid for all kinds of different reasons, then less of them will move away. We need to be more discerning. The mainstream media of the United States have clearly capitulated to the government. It's very clear. If you look at the coverage or the non-coverage of what's with the flooding in Texas, the non-coverage that we are entering hurricane season, there are going to be a lot more disasters. Pay attention to how the media is or is not covering it. Pay attention to what they're telling you about these incidents. Pay attention to what they tell you about Mexico. Anytime anything happens in Mexico, the mainstream media blows it up for a reason. When I was a young lady, my mother used to often say, "You must have discernment." And I used to get very annoyed when she would say that to me. But I understand now what she was saying, right? When you get information, you have to exercise a certain level of critical thinking. We have to exercise a certain level of critical thinking. And what I always do is when I see anything, I ask myself, who benefits if I believe this in the way it's being presented? Who benefits if I think about this in the way that this person wants me to think about it? And who doesn't? And so I think that when you see reports coming out of Mexico where they're claiming that Mexicans are protesting tourism, which I can tell you is not happening. That's not what they're protesting. They're protesting gentrification, and rightly so, and its negative impact on local communities, especially a city. You know, Mexico City is one of the biggest cities in the world. Over 20 million people living in Mexico City. That might be even more than New York City. I'll have to double check it. But it's commensurate with the number of people that live in New York City, right? You have to ask yourself these questions. For example, there's the young guy that's running for mayor in New York who just won the primary that I guess people didn't expect. The powers that be in New York clearly didn't expect that he would win, right? They expected Cuomo to win. Cuomo, who has been accused of harassment and essaying people that worked for him. But that's who, the status quo, the Democrats were lining up behind, right? Hillary Clinton endorsed him, surprise, surprise, considering her husband's history, and others in the party, all lined up and endorsed Cuomo, and I guess they thought that was going to be enough. But sometimes the American electorate is more discerning. And so New Yorkers overwhelmingly vote for Mamdani, I believe his name is. And, the current mayor is running as an independent. He doesn't have the support of the party, but apparently members of the party would rather him than this person. And so now all across social media, every day I see a new story. New York Times just ran a hit piece on Mamdani. Somebody else, people are checking all his tweets and social media posts from 10 years ago, trying to dig something out, trying to find something that will stick to this guy. You got to ask yourself, who benefits if he doesn't win? I think it's very obvious, right? They're really scared of this guy. I pray God's covering over his life. They're really afraid of him. You got to ask yourself why. I think I know why. Because he's unbought. He isn't owned by any of them. Yet, at least. And because of that, they're afraid of him. Because people are always afraid of people that they cannot control, especially rich people, because they think they can buy anything they want. And apparently they haven't been able to buy him yet. They own the Speaker of the House. They own pretty much all of the Congress. Right? They own most of the politicians in the country on either side of the aisle. But they don't own him yet. And that's why they're so afraid of him. I have no illusions about how this machine works. So I won't be shocked if something happens between now and November that either prevents him from winning or causes him to no longer be the candidate. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not wishing for it. I hope he wins. I hope he's successful, because I believe that if he's successful, others will follow his blueprint and be successful too. And that is what they are afraid of. Right? But you got to ask questions. You got to engage in critical thinking. When you see different narratives popping up on social media, especially on TikTok and other places that seek to divide people, you have to ask yourself why it's happening, why this is happening. I don't think enough of us are aware of how many content creators and influencers are being paid by third parties. Not by just the platforms, but by third parties. And some of this was uncovered during the election, right? Again, Google is free. Everybody that's up there saying things is not necessarily just saying things out of independent thought. We have to be critical thinkers. You can't let the news media, talking heads on TikTok and elsewhere lead you down the primrose path. You got to engage in critical thinking. And even when you like people, there are people that I have liked on social media that I have recently unfollowed. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about the whole Essence, FBA, ADOS, nativism stuff in my next video. But I will block anybody that I think is engaging in division and disinformation, because I think it is too serious right now for me to give time to any of that stuff. So once I see people going in a certain direction in their narratives and their conversations on their platform, I block them, because blocking them blesses me, because I don't believe everything I hear or even everything I see, because we are in the technology age. Even everything you see, you got to ask yourself questions. And so when you see a report circulating on social media, first it says there's a march when I first saw it. Then the narrative turns in people are rioting and protesting against Americans. People are rioting and protesting against American tourists. People are rioting and protesting because they don't want Americans in Mexico. The story went from the first report being a march, a protest against gentrification in Mexico City, and over time it's now a riot. It's now protests against Americans. They don't want Americans in Mexico. None of this stuff is true. But if you're not a discerning person, if you are not a critical thinker, if you don't spend time thinking about what you see and hear and why, all that's going to go right over your head. So just because someone wants me to think one way and believe one way doesn't mean that I have to, and I don't. So what I really want to say in this video before I go off is I urge us to engage in more critical thinking, especially now. Everything you hear and see, you have to ask yourself whether where the messaging is coming from, to me, is the first thing. Why anyone has an interest in you believing one position, taking one position over another. Who does it benefit? Right? And is it really true? I used to work, I'm looking for my mascara here while I'm talking to you. I used to work for an organization that helped put programs together in other countries to combat disinformation and misinformation, right? Media programs. Now they need to be doing the same media programs in America, but I don't think they're operating anymore because of what Doge and Elon Musk did to USAID, but I digress. And it was very important work and good work. And the reason I know so much about misinformation is because I bothered to read a lot of these things. And so I saw the direction the United States was going in terms of the markers for fascism, because those are some of the things that we talked about at work. And I worked with people who were experts in this area. And one of my colleagues, who's a very, very smart man, very, very intelligent man, and I try to keep in touch with him even now. There was something he would always ask when we would have conversations about issues in the office and whatever. And he would often say, and sometimes people would get annoyed with him, but he would often ask this question: is it true? He would say, before we start making a plan about how we're going to respond to this and what we are going to do, can we stop for a minute and ask ourselves this fundamental question: is it true? Are we sure that what we believe to be true is true? And this is because he would often tell me, I grew up in a communist country. I saw how disinformation was used to divide people and to keep people uninformed. And so I don't take anything at face value. I need to know that, in fact, it's true. And over time, his philosophy really did rub off on me in terms of dealing with things in the workplace and issues that would come up in the workplace. And now in my life, and of course, I also have a legal education. So that's one of the things that I also learned, is that you have to prove things. You don't just accept them. You have to have evidence. You have to have proof. As some of the things that I try to teach people is how to prove a thing that happened to you happened, right? That you have proof. And so when someone says something, I don't just go along with it just because somebody that looked official said it, or somebody put it on, it made a video, sat in front of a camera and said it. A lot of these people who are up here making videos, I don't even know, whether they have any expertise to talk about the things they're talking about. Besides, they went and did a Google search, or they saw another video and they're reposting it and telling you their opinion. Opinions are not facts. Feelings are not facts, as I often tell people. And opinions are not facts either. And all we have now in social media, which is a big cesspool, especially TikTok, of disinformation and misinformation, is people of every color, creed, and background making videos and just spewing their opinions and using it to divide groups of people and pit people against each other, because negativism gets you clicks. When you talk about anything that gets people's back up and spirit up, it gets you clicks. When I talk about like straight HR subjects, which is what I prefer to talk about, because I realize how uneducated people are about HR and how it functions and how much of an enemy it is in the workplace, those videos don't get as much likes and views as the videos I make about things like Sean Combs or Shannon Sharp. Why do you think that is? One, they're popular people, and it's negative stuff. That's a fact. I wish it weren't, but it's a fact. And if I were to make videos, which I could make, about, calling out people by name and all the nonsense I see people say on the internet, I go viral, and I'd have hundreds of thousands of people following me. But that's not why I do what I do. My goal is to help people who are workers in the United States of America primarily, but anywhere they're workers, understand how and why their work environment was not created for them and what they need to do to protect themselves in it. Because I had to learn those lessons the hard way, and I don't want everyone to have to learn the hard lessons I learned. So I try to share with people the things that I learned over the 30 years that I was a worker and the 20 plus years I was in management, combined with my legal education and all the years I spent being the person in HR and overseeing HR. That's why I do what I do. I'm not here to attack other people. I'm not here to call out other people. So what I do instead is I just unfollow people. When I see them engaging in certain types of rhetoric, I just don't follow them. And when people come into my comments and they engage in that kind of rhetoric, I block them. I don't respond. I don't get into back and forths. I just block them, and I'm not going to make a video about what they said or anything, because I'm not going to give it oxygen. Because misinformation and these things only work if you give them oxygen. Lies only work if you give them oxygen, you pass them around. So there's a lot of disinformation. For example, I saw a video. This is the last example I'm going to give, because I got to go do some other things. I saw a video circulating on Threads, which you can follow me on Threads as the anti-HR HR lady. It was on Threads. I just reopened my TikTok account for the anti-HR HR lady. Though TikTok won't let me post anything, so I don't know if I'm going to keep it open. I may just shut it back down. But I saw the video up there, and this woman, black woman, was claiming that it was a video of Haitians defending themselves against ICE. Turns out that that's a lie. It's a video of the police trying to arrest someone in a neighborhood in Chicago, and the people in the neighborhood pushing back on it, right? Nobody's Haitian. And the officers involved are not from ICE. But this is creating a narrative about the Haitian community that could be very problematic for them, right? And it's a lie. And this video is circulating all over social media. And there are a couple people who have come into the comments and pointed out that it's not true. And I've done my own research, so I know it's not true. But people are just passing it around, and no one's stopping to think, is this true before they send it. People are making up videos to get clicks based on misrepresenting what is in the video. And I'm sure many of you have seen it. Disinformation is how we are where we are in the United States of America right now. And social media has been a huge contributor to it, especially in the last election cycle. And that's not going to change. If anything, it's going to get worse. With the use of AI, it's going to get worse. And so if you are not more discerning about the narratives that you see cropping up on social media, and ask yourself who it serves if you take a certain position or you believe a certain thing. Black people ain't gonna make it. I don't care whether you're Black American, Caribbean American, immigrant from Africa, none of us ain't gonna make it. America isn't gonna make it, but America is already on its knees. My concern is for the survival of Black people. And I don't care where you came from. And I don't make those kinds of, divisions in my thinking. Because I know it don't serve me as a Black person. And it doesn't serve my larger community. But social media is actively being used to keep these divisions in place and to build on them and to spread them through misinformation and disinformation. And unfortunately, the average American doesn't have more than an 8th grade education. That's just data-based, right? The average voter anyway, average voter in America. And so you don't learn critical thinking in high school. You don't learn it in middle school. I learned critical thinking in college. I started questioning the things that I had been taught in high school and before that when I went to college. That's why they're attacking the universities so aggressively, because they know that that's where people learn to question things. That's where I learned to question things, right? And so if the average person doesn't have access to a higher education because the system has been set up to ensure that only a certain amount of people get to have it, and the system is actually working to make it even less than before, right? Then you have an electorate and a population that is undereducated and therefore doesn't even know how to engage in critical thinking. One of the things I'm thinking about doing in my community is trying to put on a seminar about critical thinking, what it is, how to engage in it, because I think it's important. Especially now in the age of disinformation, this is the kind of stuff we need to be talking about. Because I'm really worried about what I see. I'm really worried for the Black community because of what I see happening, right? And so I really would urge us to make critical thinking a priority, to make questioning what we see on social media and limiting how much social media we ingest a priority. I try to have at least 2 to 3 days a week where I don't go on social media at all. I have a no social media day on Sundays if I can help it. I'm not always successful, but I try. And I've tried to also add Saturdays. When I don't have to be on social media, I try not to be on it. And I try not to be on it for more than a couple hours a day. Because it impacts the way that you feel. It impacts my mood. And so I personally am trying to limit the amount of time. And I would encourage others to do the same. Because where we are as a society in the United States of America and elsewhere, other countries are recognizing the threat and are doing things to try to address it, right? But in the United States, they aren't doing anything because the powers that be benefit from the ignorance of the population and the misinformation that they are spreading. I look at YouTube and I see all these commercials with all this, Republican propaganda. And I may look at it and realize what it is, but other people will look at it and not recognize it for what it is. Right? And so I am very concerned about the Black community and its consumption of a lot of this disinformation and the impact that it's having. And I see the impact. And I'll talk more about the impact in my next video, and what I think we need to do. But those are my thoughts, because I've got a couple comments about this whole I hope you're safe stuff. And so I wanted to speak to that directly, as well as, warn about looking out for misinformation and disinformation and not just buying into every narrative you see on the internet. I hope that this comment is received in the spirit in which it has been given. Please feel free to comment, but please do so constructively, because y'all know there ain't no democracy in my comment section. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, like, share it with a friend, share it with anybody you think needs to see it. As always, I appreciate your attention. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you supporting this channel, and I hope you will continue to do so. I will continue to tell the truth as I know it to be, and to try to share the information that will help employees try to free themselves from the plantation that is the American work environment, and if they can't free themselves, to at least survive it as best they can. Thank you for watching. As always, HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend, but I am. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.